afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the beautiful foyer of the Carlsbad Foundation. This beautiful place is where we do this wonderful show called The Faces of Carlsbad. And we're sponsored by that wonderful Intrepid Potash Company, so never forget them. And this is a program that we will bring to you people you probably don't know, or maybe you do know. And today I'm very proud to be here with an old-time friend of mine. Well, he's not old. All my friends are young. But I'm talking to Mr. John Tigert. John, it's so nice to see you today.
Thank you, Bob.
And we've got a lot to talk about. But a lot of people, when they see this show, they say, I've never seen this lady or I've never seen this man before. But all of a sudden, somebody like you pops up and they say, I know that man. Because you're well known in Carlsbad and well liked, let me tell you.
Well, thank you.
Let's get to the beginning. Where you were born, John, and where you grew up, and what kind of life you had when you were younger.
Oh, man, talk about a complicated life. I was actually born in Syracuse, New York.
Syracuse?
Yes. Yes, I was a Yankee. That's the good news or the bad news. But then we moved. My dad was in the Air Force, so I lived all over the world. I've actually lived in about 5 different countries. And but I was, at one time, I considered home Biloxi, Gulfport, Mississippi. I lived on the Gulf Coast most of my life. I went to 4 different high schools. I went to high school in Germany for 2 years. In fact, Elvis Presley's wife was one of the people in our class.
Is that right?
Yes. She didn't know me. It was a huge high school. Over in Germany, high schools only go up to the 10th grade, all the different Air Force bases. And when you're in the junior and senior, you actually was like college. You went to dormitories, and you came home on weekends, on Sunday. And then you had to leave for college, school on Sundays, but you came home on Friday night. So you were only home on the weekends. And her dad was a major in the Air Force at Wiesbaden Air Force Base in Germany, and that's where. And Elvis was over there at the time. We never saw him, even though we yelled every time an Army convoy would go by.
Yeah.
And then we actually moved from there to Oklahoma. I actually went to Oklahoma Boys State. From there, we were only there a year, my junior year. Then we moved to Mississippi again. My dad became an instructor. And then my dad retired out of the Air Force, and he got into federal aviation. And his first civilian job, so to speak, was in Carlsbad, New Mexico. So I moved out here in the middle of my senior year. I got here like in February. And ended up going on a baseball scholarship to Eastern New Mexico University. Met a girl from Carlsbad, married a girl from Carlsbad. And this ended up being my home. So actually, I've been here.
And your wife is?
Kay Leslie. She was Kay Leslie then.
Yes.
Yes, and everybody knows her. She works at Lakeview now and whatnot. She gets a little upset about that. She said she's been here all her life, and she's known as Coach Tigert's wife instead of,
Well, not to my wife. She's known as Kay Tigert.
I know, but it just irritates. They say, "Oh, your coach's wife," and that irritates her. And I said, "There's nothing I can do about that. I'm sorry." But so I ended up, when I graduated from Eastern, I got a job. A lot of people don't realize this. I actually got a job as the ranger carrying the gun. I was the ranger. I wasn't a guide. I'd actually been a guide for 3 summers in a row, but I became the ranger. And I was fixing to probably go to Flagstaff to kind of like a law enforcement thing to get really into it. When Andy Anderson, who bless his heart just passed away, he was the principal. He called me up and saw my resume that I had a PE degree and all that, and asked me if I'd be interested in being a football coach and basketball coach in Carlsbad for the 8th and 9th grade. And of course, back then it was mid-high, so it was 9th and 10th grade.
You're right.
And so I jumped at the chance. He offered me a contract of $5,400, and if I coached 3 sports, I'd get $6,300. And I couldn't wait to sign because I thought I was going to be a millionaire.
Those were the days.
Yes, my wife was so excited that I had so that tells you how much I was getting paid as a ranger at the cavern. So I wasn't getting paid that well. But, and so that was the good news. The bad news is I taught for about a year and a half. I was in the teacher's lounge, and my wife called up, and she was crying. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "You got a letter here. You have to report to El Paso the next morning. You've been drafted in the military." Boy. And I had a wife and twins, a boy and a girl. And I said, "I'm not going." And my wife says, "You have to. You're going to be have to go to jail." So I went down.
What year was that, John?
1969.
1969.
1969. they had just escalated. I think President Johnson decided to send over another 60,000 troops to Vietnam or something like that. And but anyway, I joined the Air Force that afternoon because I wanted to go to flight school, and that didn't work out because there was so many of us trying to get in. So I just ended up in the Air Force, and then of course when I got out of the Air Force, Reed McCloskey, I got an early out because he offered me a job as a teacher and coach again. So I came back to Carlsbad and ended up retiring about 3 years ago with 39 years.
Getting back to Vietnam, John, what was your impression while you were over there?
Oh man, I got to be careful about my words here. I tell people if that's not the armpit of the world, you can stand on a bucket and see it from there. To me, it wouldn't have been that hard if I hadn't been married and had kids, but I worried about my wife and kids. You know, you're 12,000 miles away from home and everything. It was definitely a cultural shock. I probably lost about 25 pounds, 30 pounds, just the stress level, worrying about going over and stuff. But I was there for 11 months, 20 days, 17 hours, 16 minutes, and I used to tell you how many seconds. I tell people I wouldn't probably take $1 million for the experience, but you couldn't pay me $1 million to go back either. My wife could always tell when I taught history in the school system, and during the night I'd be rolling and I couldn't sleep, and she'd say, "You're teaching about Vietnam again, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." But it was never, I was in the Air Force over there, so it wasn't like a battle or anything. The worst part of the dream is that they were going to send me back. I had to go back, and I just, in my dreams, I couldn't have it. She said, you can always tell when I was teaching a unit on Vietnam. I was just going back. I met some people that, had it a whole lot worse than I did. They were in the field, there's guys over there that were in the field 30 days and only 1 day off. And I was in maintenance control officer, and then I became a comm center specialist, sending out teletypes, and you're in a bunker and everything and whatnot. So probably the worst part on my end of it was maybe rocket attacks and stuff like that. But the guys that did hand-to-hand combat and stuff like that, no, I didn't have to do anything. I don't know how I could have handled that.
Do you remember Art Foster?
Yes.
By chance?
Yes.
I saw Art Foster when I got back from the Palau Islands, and he was in uniform, and I said, "Well, where are you headed for now, Art?" And he said, "Well, they're sending me to Vietnam." And I said, "For goodness sakes, please be careful."
Yes,
he said,
helicopter pilot.
Yeah, and he was killed over there.
Yes.
And you never forget those events. Getting back to your mom and dad, though, where were they originally from?
Well, my dad did the cardinal sin. You have to know the story about that a little bit. My father and my mom and their best friend were a threesome. They went everywhere together, movies, bowling, everything. They both got their own bombers. My father got the Leakin Deacon, that was the bomber. Their best friend got the Dazzling Duchess, and they got their own bombers. They volunteered to fly, you only had to fly 25 missions. They both flew 51 missions. Wow. Both of them came back to the States. My father got into what they call the ferrying service, and that means that he took bombers. They were bringing all these bombers back, so they had to take them to all these bases. And during Christmas, he volunteered to go on a mission because he didn't have any kids. He was going to fly this bomber from Cheyenne, Wyoming, down to Florida. When he landed, he was supposed to call my mom, and she was going to tell him for his Christmas present that she was pregnant, and that was me. But he did not call. The bomber was listed in the base paper for about 5 days that was missing. They didn't find the plane for over 21 days. In fact, my mom took a train, took over a week to get back to Syracuse because all the troops coming back. And she got back to Syracuse. They didn't do it like in the movies. She didn't get a telegram. They called her up on the phone and said, "We did find your husband. He is dead. What do you want to do with the body?" That was the end of it. Lightning had hit the plane over near Fort Smith, Arkansas, and they went down and they were killed. The best friend, the exact same day, the best friend crashed and broke his back, and he's laying in the hospital, and he wrote my father a letter, and of course it got to my mom, and she wrote him back and said John has been killed, and blah blah blah, and that she was pregnant and all that. And for over a year, he sent my mom money every month, a little bit of money every month to help her along. And eventually, after about a year, he wrote her a letter and said, "This is stupid. I love you too." So my mom flew out and dated him for about a month or whatever, and they got married. So my father and my dad were best friends, and I'm supposed to be the spitting image of my father. My dad, like I said, he made the cardinal sins. He was from Tyler, Texas, and he married a Yankee. So so
you don't do that if you're
yes, you don't do that. You don't do that especially back in those days. But he did, and it worked out all right. And in fact, when I got married, I was actually illegally married for about 4 days. I went by John Tigert all my life. Back in those days, my dad didn't adopt me, or my dad didn't adopt me because at that time, if he had adopted me, I would have lost all my GI Bill benefits. They've changed the law since then. So he didn't adopt me, but I just went by John Tigert. I was just John Tigert. Well, I get married and I signed my marriage license, John Tigert. Well, my mother-in-law actually drove up to Eastern where we went, we got married and went up there during Christmas break, and had me put in parentheses Kaya, C-A-Y-E-A, John Kaya, and that was my official name. And so we just put it in parentheses. My wife and I, when she got pregnant, we knew that was going to cause us a lot of problems. So I went to court in Portales and got my name changed to Tigert. I felt like I owed I call him Pop. I owe Pop a lot. I mean, if he hadn't have told me, I remember I was in about the 6th grade. I was out playing in the yard. It's a Sunday afternoon. My mom said, "Johnny, would you come in here a minute?" And I walked in the house and Dad was sitting at the kitchen table. He's real quiet. Mom said, "Come with me," and we went to the back bedroom. And she opened up a cedar chest and took out an American flag and different stuff and said, "This is your real father." And I don't know how, they must have done it just the way it needed to be done, because I know I just went, okay. And I just went outside and started playing. And I remember hearing my dad say, "How did he take it?" And she said it didn't bother him at all. So he was Pop, and if they had never told me, I wouldn't know to this day. But
the sad part was it had to be like that with lightning hitting the plane.
Yeah, after 51 missions over Europe, then lightning
can you believe that with all the flak in the air, and he survived 51 of those, but gets hit by lightning?
Well, and then my Dad, 51 missions, and then, if they only knew, he dies of stomach cancer from those Lucky Strike cigarettes and all that they had in World War, that they all smoked.
You remember?
Yeah, that you traded them. I mean, that was, they were like M&Ms.
Well, you'd get them in your food packs.
Sure.
And I tried one out just one time, and I said, "That's not for me."
Yeah.
And I would always give mine away.
My dad, he tried to quit, and I fully believe, and I'm just telling you, I'll argue with anybody about this. He gave up the Lucky Strike cigarettes and started dipping. And I think that just swallowing that stuff gave him stomach cancer. His lungs, his heart, his brain were just as sharp as ever when he died.
Yeah, it's way with my father. He smoked 2.5 packs a day, and when he died at the age of 77, they did an autopsy and said that he had the lungs of a 21-year-old.
My dad went to the dentist twice, and that was to have his teeth cleaned his entire life. I mean, it didn't run, but that stomach cancer did him in. So,
well, anyway, you got back to the United States, and you had, if I recall, a younger brother by the name of Gary.
I have 2 brothers. I had a middle brother named Harold, and then Gary was the youngest. Yes, he's 6 years younger than me. And in fact, one of his good friends was Kenny Ross. They were
Kenny Ross, of course.
Yeah,
well, I'll never forget Kenny Ross when we were playing football at our school. In those days, the elementary schools could play football, and the only touchdown scored in that game was against us, and it was Kenny Ross who went all the way for the touchdown.
Well, they would have been awesome together, because my brother, like I said, is about 6'5" and 285. He ended up playing for the University of Hawaii and football and everything, and so, yeah, they would have been awesome. But my dad, in federal aviation, you have to, it's kind of like the military, you bid on different jobs, and he got a higher paying job to move to Palacios, Texas, so that's why they moved I guess Gary was a sophomore in high school when they moved. Yeah.
Well, he was such a nice student to have in class, because as you know, not all students are gems. But every so often you get a few that are gems, and Gary was one of those.
Yeah, well, you've been there. The good news is most of our kids that you have in class, turned out great. I've had a couple that have ended up in prison. I don't brag about it for sure, but they ended up in prison, and there were problems in school and whatnot. And I'm not mentioning names. You have them, but for every one of those, you have 150 of them that are great kids. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're just good kids, and you're interested in what they do, and you're glad to see they're doing good jobs, and it. Maybe wrongfully so or rightfully so, but you like to take some credit for it that they ended up, look at how many of them are in Carlsbad that have jobs here and they're businessmen in town and stuff like that.
Very successful.
And they always know who you are and remember you.
Oh,
Whether
yeah.
you were the good coach or the bad coach or the bad teacher, whatever, they still remember you and they say hi to you and stuff. So.
Well, I want to mention the different schools you taught in, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the coaching career because I find that very, very exciting to talk about that. But let's talk about some of the schools that you were involved in different cities.
Well, you mean the ones that I went to or the ones I taught in?
You taught in.
The only school system I taught in was in Carlsbad except for Odessa. When I first got teached here, it was mid-high. Then I went into the service, and when I came back, they didn't have my job back there at mid-high, and I got a job under Herb Hickerson at Eisenhower.
Oh, I remember Herb.
I needed Mr. Hickerson because I coming from the military. He was a very strict principal, blah, blah, blah. This is what you're going to do. And I could relate to that because that's how you are in the military. And I was there at Eisenhower. From there, I moved back up. They changed the name of the school to Leyva after Porky. Leyva, who was a good friend of mine.
Yes, he was.
And they named the school after him. And so I moved there. I was 18 years at the junior high under Benny Willman. He was the principal.
I remember Benny.
And yes, and we were there, and I was the athletic coordinator for there. And then, I still meet some of the older coaches, and we always say some of our best years were when we were at Eisenhower, and it was 7th and 8th grade, and all those kids, and it was just a good school, and that was probably our best memories. But as a teacher and a coach, you think you have to move up, especially as a coach.
Oh, yeah.
You want to be you want to be the head varsity coach someday in whatever sport, and you had to go through that. Then you had to go through the steps. I started off as a 7th grade basketball coach, then an 8th grade basketball coach, and then 9th, and you just moved up. Same thing in football. And so I went from there to, actually I was at Leyva, so I had to go to the high school. I felt that's my next step. So I was the first freshman dean. That's when they moved the freshmen up to the high school.
Oh, yeah.
I was the dean. I was in charge of all discipline.
That was interesting.
Yes, 560 freshmen, yeah.
Yeah, right.
I had, I think, 270 were absent one day. They did a walkout or something, and I'm supposed to call every one of them's parents to find out where they're at. That didn't happen.
Oh, you're kidding?
No,
Oh, my gosh.
No. In fact, that ended up being my easiest day because I said, well, if I can't get a hold of all of them, I'm not going to call any of them. So I just put down unexcused, and that was it. But from the dean's position the next year, I put in for athletic director, and I became the athletic director for 8 years when Mr. Asbill was the superintendent,
Yes.
and Charlotte Neal my last year. And then, and when I retired from there, I went to only the second school system I've ever been into. I got a job as the coach at Odessa Permian. And I went over there.
Yes.
I was there for a year and a half. And Mr. Quintello, Tom Quintello, who's the principal here, called me up and asked me would I come back and coach the K-Girls again, the softball team. And I said, it was good just to know to come back home because I felt like a foreigner over there in Texas.
Well, listen, let me ask you another question on that. You coached what sport mostly? For those who don't know about this.
24 years head varsity softball coach.
Softball.
I was the head girls volleyball coach for 1 year. I just did it because they couldn't find anybody. And I was proud enough that we went to state and everything, had some great athletes. I was head girls basketball coach 1 year. They couldn't get anybody. I told them I'd step forward and I'd take it. A lot of people don't remember this. I was the head boys gymnastic coach for 2 years. Oh. Coach Woodard was the head girls coach. Yeah. I was really his assistant girls. He needed somebody to help spot. And then I took the boys. The boys, we only had 4 or 5 guys. And that was very tragic. I knew nothing about gymnastic. In fact, I recruited this young man. He won a gold medal for me in junior high on the rings. Because I felt so inadequate, I got out of gymnastics. I said, I can't do this. Yeah. And the following year, the young man fell off the rings, and it was Mr. Swayze.
Oh, yes, I remember that tragic
He fell off the rings and broke his neck and died.
And died.
And I just,
That was another case I couldn't get over.
Yes, thank God that I wasn't there. I probably could have got out. Probably would have gotten out of coaching.
Let me, in the few moments we have left, you're now the principal at another school. Tell us how that got started and the name of that school, John.
Well, first of all, saying principal's being awful polite and awful nice. I'm really the custodian, security officer, maintenance foreman, principal stuff. Actually, we had two young ladies, Heather Harvey and Summer Doherty, that came up with the idea of having a Christian elementary school in town. They approached the elders of Sunset Church of Christ. Sunset went to Fox and Lake, and this was before I even came along, and they created this idea and this dream to have it. Fox and Lake donated a building right behind their church. It's a huge, huge building.
Oh, yes.
And they donated it, 111 South Mesquite, and donated it. So the Sunset Church raised a significant amount of money for it to get started and put it on the ground floor. The bad news is they couldn't find an administrator. They had to have an administrator with certificate to be the administrator. They had all these teachers lined up, but no administrator. And my wife says, well, you ought to become the PE teacher. And I said, no, I'm not doing that. But then she said, well, why don't you look at being the principal? And I went, I know nothing about being an elementary school principal, but I was an athletic director. So I knew about budgets. I know about, working with people and trying to get donations and ads and stuff. And I said, I can do this. And I turned around and made each one of those young ladies head of a department. One of them is the curriculum director. She knows all about Christian curriculum and all that. The other one knows all about CYFD, all the pre-K little kid rules and laws. Right. And so I kind of delegated the authority, and we went from there. It's called Trinity Christian Academy. We started off with only 32 kids last year. This year we've doubled. In fact, as of today, we got 72.
Wow.
We probably have a waiting list for pre-K. We have 2 classes of pre-K of 12 each. Next year we're going to try to go to 3 classes of pre-K because we have to turn down a lot of pre-K students all the time.
That's that kindergarten group, right?
Pre-K is from pre-K all the way up. We go from pre-K all the way up through 7th grade. So we have pre-K, kindergarten, 1st grade. Pre-K is 3 and 4-year-olds.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, we start that early, and that's a whole different atmosphere. All the little kids call me Coach Tiger, and they growl.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's so cute. Yeah, probably the hardest thing I do really during the day with the little kids is to tie their shoes. It's amazing how many the little ones don't know how to tie their shoes yet. So, but I enjoy it. I volunteered to do it, and I told them I'd only be about around there maybe 2 times a week. And so far, I think I've only missed 2 days total out of the last year and a half. I go there every day, feel responsible and whatnot. But it's growing good. And we have a lot of, probably, I won't say 50%, but a large percent of our kids were homeschool kids. They have never, we've gotten several kids, in the 4th, 5th, 6th grade, never even been in public schools ever and stuff.
Well, I've talked to a number of people who have children at the school, and they said that the parents like you and the kids love you.
Actually, the pre-K teachers won't let me go into the cafeteria during lunchtime because they get them all settled down and quiet and eating. And when I walk in there, I create a riot.
I know.
Because they want me to open up their potato chip bags and sit on my lap and all that. So yeah, I missed my calling. I told my wife, I went home and said, I messed up. 39 years, and the bad news is, especially as an AD and a dean, you kind of remember the bad kids. You don't remember a lot of the good kids. And I said, man, I could have been an elementary school principal and done this for 30, 40 years and loved it and never had a really bad moment. So, no, I admit, I'll admit right here on TV, I love them. It's a different world. It's a different world.
Well, with that, John, we're going to thank you and tell all of our viewers this has been a most enjoyable day because you brought a lot of nice memories back for me.
Well,
and I want to thank you so much for being here.
I appreciate it, Bob. Thank you very much.
It was so nice to talk to your brother Gary today on the phone. Thank you so much for that.
Well, when he comes in town, I'll definitely look you up.
Okay, I'll have to look up at him because I'm only 5'6", and I have to look up at 6'6".
He's a big boy. He's a big boy.
On behalf of Channel 23 and Intrepid Potash, we want to bid you all a fond goodbye and good luck. Anyway.